So welcome to this episode of History Hunters. I'm here at the Maple Hill Cemetery in Huntsville, Alabama. It was once the state capital of Alabama, and there are a lot of historical figures buried here, a lot of Confederate soldiers, a lot of Confederate officials, a lot of governors of the state, and there's at least one character actor from Bonanza, and I'm going to try to find all their graves on this episode of History Hunters. I think this is going to be an interesting one. So there was this massive tree here, and I want to show you what they did to it. Look at this. I mean, how cool is that? So my first stop is going to be here at the tomb of Albert Erskine. 1933, he killed himself. He was the president of the Studebaker Motor Company Corporation. He literally led the company from the horse and buggy days into a major manufacturer of automobiles in the United States. And in 1929, he lost it all during the stock market crash. In 1933, he decided to end it all. Bang, right there. And that's his tomb. We'll have to go up there and talk about him. I find it so sad that people find their economic situation so dire that they decide to choose permanent solutions to temporary problems. I don't know what was going on in this gentleman's mind, but I know that he had it good for a long time. He was born in 1871 and he died in 1933. In fact, the 1927 Studebaker Erskine Roadster, model 50J with a rumble seat, was named after him. Today, however, there are only about 6 known to exist. This is the inside of the Erskine family mausoleum. On the other side is stained glass. Looks like Mary came to the tomb. The angel said, Jesus is not here, he's risen. This man obviously was of great wealth, enough to build this mausoleum for him and his family. So I don't know how bad of a situation he was economically. So I haven't been to the south very often, but it's awfully green here and it's starting to become fall here. The leaves are falling. I'm watching squirrels scamper down trees. I hear the birds singing. And it's a beautiful day. The sun is shining. Fortunately, on our trip here to Alabama, it's been really nice weather. So not too hot, not too cold, and certainly not too humid. Okay, so now this next grave is rather interesting as well, because this is the mother of a famous Hollywood actress and the wife of a future Speaker of the House of the United States Congress, Reuben Bankhead. His wife's buried here, and I understand that 3 weeks after she gave birth to Tula Bankhead, the actress, she died of some kind of blood poisoning, and she's buried in this grave right here. So undoubtedly, the actress Tula Bankhead had visited this cemetery and this gravesite. Well, here you go, in tender memory of Adeline Eugene Bankhead, beloved wife of William Bankhead, born 1880, and she died in 1802. She was just a babe. She was not even 22 years old. She was 21 years old when she passed away. Very tragic. Of course, Mr. Bankhead went on to become a Speaker of the House of Representatives in Congress, a very important position. Who knows how many times he may have visited this grave, but he gave her a pretty nice marker here, this obelisk marker, and as you can tell, there's a lot of lichens attached to it. It's always tragic when a young man loses his wife right after childbirth.
There was more than one politician in Tula Bankhead's lineage. While her dad was Speaker of the House, her grandfather, seen here, was John Hollis Bankhead, who was a Confederate Army soldier and a Democratic U.S. Senator from Alabama from 1907 until his death in 1920. Tula is the woman at right, and her sister Eugenia is at left. Their uncle, John Bankhead II, seen here with the girls, was also a U.S. Senator. William Bankhead was devastated by his wife's death and descended into bouts of depression and alcoholism. Consequently, Tula and her sister Eugenia were mostly reared by their paternal grandmother at Sunset, the family estate in Jasper, Alabama. As a child, Bankhead was considered extremely homely and overweight, while her sister was slim and prettier. Because of this, she did everything to gain her father's attention and approval, and would perform around the house, sing, and recite literature that she'd memorized. Tallulah, of course, grew up to become a famous actress and starred in movies like Faithless with Robert Montgomery and Devil and the Deep with Gary Cooper. She was also notorious in her tawdry lifestyle and her numerous affairs. For years a heavy cigarette smoker and drinker, she developed emphysema and became malnourished. In late 1968, she was hospitalized with pneumonia and a strain of the Hong Kong flu. Her last coherent words reportedly were a garbled request for codeine, bourbon. Miss Bankhead died at the age of 66. Curiously, as I was editing this video, a viewer named Larry Slagle sent me these photos of the grave of Tula Bankhead in St. Paul's Cemetery in Kent County, Maryland. Occasionally someone visits her grave near a peaceful lake and leaves an object like a small bottle of Jim Beam and a pack of cigarettes as a remembrance of her.
I don't think I have seen as many people walking around or riding their bicycles in this park than I have here. Crazy. I was over at the Erskine grave and just had this weird sensation that somebody was over my shoulder, and I looked and there was a guy walking around the mausoleum. It kind of freaked me out a little bit. Let's go over here and see what this is. It's pretty cool when you have cemeteries that have markers highlighting some important people.
At first I was confused about this marker because it had nothing to do with the graves behind it. The marker mentions the Huntsville Meridian, which was surveyed in 1807 and is the reference for all properties surveyed in North Alabama. I found no information for Richard Anderson, who died in 1859, or William Tabor, who died in 1883.
Wow, this is really sad. Look at this. It looks like it was a child's grave marker. It says Lady Lee, and I doubt that there's going to be any information on her, but vandals must have done this, or possibly a tree branch falling over the years. This is the grave of Oliver Sledge. He died in 1861. So right now I'm at the grave of John Jackson Sparkman, and you probably don't know that name, but he almost, or he could have been Vice President of the United States. He ran on the ticket of Adlai Stevenson. He was in the U.S. Senate and Congress for a while. He served in World War I. His grave's right here. I had trouble looking for it, but big letters there, Sparkman. So here's the grave of John Jackson Sparkman, December 20th, 1899 to November 16th, 1985. And his wife, Chelsea Ivo Hall Sparkman, 1899 to 1999. He was a congressman from Alabama from 1937 to 1946, and then he was a U.S. Senator from Alabama from 1946 to 1979. He was also the Democrat Party's vice presidential nominee in 1952 on the ticket with Illinois Governor Adlai Stevenson.
We recognize the problem of the impact of imports on small business, and I'm certainly hopeful that in the next session of Congress we may be able to do something that will recognize this problem and seek to do something about it.
You probably know that I started collecting autographs when I was a kid, and one of the genres that I was collecting was the public officials, like elected officials like this man here. So I did write to John Sparkman, I think at least twice. I was getting some autographs from him, and I still have them. So I feel kind of not a personal connection, but at least some connection to this gentleman. He was pretty good about signing autographs. So how many of you have ever heard about people painting on actual spider webs? I mean, it seems like an impossible task, but you learn something new every day, every time you watch History Hunters. Well, not every day. I don't post every day. You know what I'm saying.
This is the grave of Anne Bradshaw Kuhn, who died in 1956. She was known as the spiderweb artist. When Anne was 11, she read in a magazine about a German artist who painted on the webs of spiders. After carefully collecting webs for a canvas, Anne would delicately apply tiny drops of oil paint and let it dry, and each painting took 5 to 6 weeks to complete. She perfected a method of painting with oil on fragile cobwebs, resulting in graceful works of art. Her paintings were exhibited at the New York World's Fair and Robert Ripley's Believe It or Not Museum in Florida.
It's a shame that her works of art have has been destroyed. But what do you expect painting on spider webs? Weird, huh? Boy, I came up to this and I have no idea what happened, but there are 3 obelisk markers that have fallen, have been toppled. This is crazy. I don't know if they were pushed over or what happened. It looks like an act of vandalism. I can't say for sure. Okay, I was just told by the lady that's wheeling around on her little tricycle. She said that this was all created by tornado damage. So apparently it knocked a tree down, which knocked these markers down. So right behind this one is John Reed. I don't know exactly who he is, but he died in Huntsville, March 9th, 1861. And right next to it is the gentleman I wanted to find, Jeremiah Clemens. He died in 1865. It's very hard to read his marker, and it looks like it's been split in 2. He was a distant cousin of Samuel Clemens, the famous author Mark Twain. He was actually a U.S. Senator from 1849 to 1953, and he also was a writer of novels, including Bernard Lyle, Mustang Gray, The Revivals, A Tale of the Times of Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton, and Tobias Wilson, A Tale of the Great Rebellion. He was a great fan of Abraham Lincoln, and he supported slavery being abolished, and I noticed that he resembled his famous cousin. This was erected by his wife, Mary Clemens.
Alabama became a state in 1819, and since that time has had 54 governors. 5 of them, Thomas Bibb, Clement Clay Jr., Reuben Chapman, Robert Patton, and David Peter Lewis are all at rest here.
I always appreciate it when a cemetery puts markers of the mainly historical figures in the cemetery. This one is that of Thomas Bibb. He was the 2nd governor of Alabama who succeeded his brother. Right there, it says Thomas Bibb, 2nd governor, 1820 to 1821. He succeeded his brother, William Wyatt Bibb. His brother was the 1st governor of the state of Alabama. Here repose the mortal remains of Thomas Bibb, born in 1782, and he died in 1839. Wow.
I did locate the grave of Robert Miller Patton, Alabama's 20th governor from 1865 to 1868. He was a prominent merchant and a cotton planter, owning 4,000 acres of land and 300 slaves. While he initially spoke against secession, Patton financially supported Alabama's war efforts and served as a commissioner in the Confederate government. 2 of his sons died fighting for the Confederates, and his plantation house was damaged by Union soldiers. Governor Patton opposed extending civil rights to freed slaves, including voting rights. He did veto a bill that would have strictly limited the abilities of blacks to move freely throughout Alabama. But he did sign into law the convict leasing system, allowing freed slaves to be ordered into servitude as punishment for a crime. His primary focus as governor, however, was on rebuilding Alabama's war-torn economy. With the advent of the Civil War, Governor David Peter Lewis opposed secession as a member of the Alabama Secession Convention. He was elected the 23rd governor of Alabama, serving until 1874. With the election of Abraham Lincoln as president, he championed Alabama's secession from the Union. When the Confederate government was organized, President Jefferson Davis appointed him as Secretary of War. But he was a poor administrator and unable to organize unity among the secessionist states. After the war, he practiced law in Huntsville, and in 1883 he found himself as a defense lawyer for Frank James, brother of Jesse James. Frank James was brought to Huntsville to stand trial for the robbery of a public works paymaster of $5,200 at Muscle Shoals, and he was acquitted.
All right, this marker says this is the grave of Reuben Chapman. He was the 13th governor of Alabama from 1847 to 49, and he was also a U.S. Senator. He was a Confederate envoy to France. And here's his grave right here. Reuben Chapman. He died in Huntsville, 1882. It looks like there's a bunch of Chapmans here. This tall marble cross. A lot of Confederates here. Look at this one. This is Turner Clanton. He was a lieutenant colonel in the Confederate States of America. There's not a lot of fanfare in this cemetery for this gentleman. It's Leroy Pope Walker. He lived from 1817 to 1884. And he had some true significance in American history. He was a Confederate brigadier general. He was the first Secretary of War in the Confederate States of America. He was appointed by President Jefferson Davis. And he gave the signal by telegraph from Montgomery for the bombardment of Fort Sumter, which is what started the 5-year Civil War. Can you imagine the historical significance of this guy here? And he doesn't even have any kind of special markings. That's incredible. There's so much incredible history that's not being taught in our country, and I'm really happy that we can present such information. I mean, who would ever know that this gentleman here helped start the Civil War? I mean, he was kind of a messenger relaying the message to bomb Fort Sumter, but not even a significant marker here for him. So here's another of the creative uses of a dead tree. Look at this. Somebody has carved it and made some art out of it. And I'm sure it looks like they put some kind of varnish or something on it. Yeah, instead of taking it down, they created vines and leaves, vining up the dead trunk. So Connie, the historian who's riding around on her little tricycle, told me about this guy here, Eggbert Jones. Now look at this. He was an honored member of the Alabama BAR. Colonel of the 4th Alabama Regiment, he died at the Orange County House in Virginia, September 1861, of wounds received July 21st, 1861, the First Battle of Manassas. Wow. And next to him is his wife, Mary, who was born in Huntsville, 1832. She was married in 1854, and she died in 1855. I understand that they had to repair these markers because they were either tilted or knocked off. Apparently the storm came in here and the winds and fallen trees had blown over a lot of the markers. There's the one over here too. You know, when you bury people underneath trees, it's bound to happen. Let's see who this is. Look at this, been completely displaced. Well, that's an unusual name. Waddy Tate. He died in 1847. He was just, what's that, 21 years old. I want you to look at this. This soil here is just like this red clay. It's almost like a brick. It's crazy. And here's the last governor that I needed to find. There's Clement Clay, 1789 to 1866. He was the 8th governor of Alabama from 35 to 37. Wow.
He was a congressman, senator, and governor of Alabama. He served during the War of 1812 with the United States forces operating against the Creek Indians in Georgia and Alabama. After serving in the Alabama state legislature, he was elected to Congress, serving from 1829 to 1835. He was also governor of Alabama in 1836 and 1837. History has recorded that he and his son had 87 slaves who worked for plantations that they owned.
Right over here, I understand there is a Confederate soldier section, and that a lot of these graves are actually unidentified. So they brought these soldiers in, and quite a number of them have been identified, but we'll go in here and take a look at it. There's this massive magnolia tree in this grave plot of the unknown soldiers, Confederate soldiers. This is truly a vast number of unknown, unidentified people in these graves. It's crazy. There's, looks like hundreds of them. Wow. And right here's the Confederate Monument. It's erected in 1905. It says, in memory of those heroes who fell in defense of the principles which gave birth to the Confederate cause, erected by the Daughters of the Confederacy. A little bit about the monument itself. It was dedicated in 1905. Unveiling of the Confederate Monument attracted the largest gathering of veterans that had been seen here since the reunion of 1891. The monument depicted a Confederate private with his musket at parade rest. It was completed in Vermont marble, stands over 24 feet tall, and cost $3,000. The statue was designed by Mr. John Frederick Hummel, a local artist, and Mr. Jim Mott Robinson posed for the sculpture.
These unassuming graves are loaded with immense Confederate history. The grave at left is that of Clement Clay Jr., who was a member of the U.S. Senate until January 21, 1861, when Alabama voted to secede from the Union and he became a member of the Confederate Senate. He was the son of Governor and Senator Clement Clay, and in 1863 served as a diplomatic agent for the Confederacy. He was so entrenched in the Confederacy that his picture was featured on the $1 bill of Confederate States of America currency. He was an impassioned racist and denounced the Northern anti-slavery Republican Party. He denounced the Republican opposition to the Fugitive Slave Act and the spread of slavery, saying, quote, "No sentiment is more insulting or more hostile to our domestic tranquility, to our social order, and to our social existence than is contained in the declaration that our Negroes are entitled to liberty and equality with the white man." To Clay, the election of Abraham Lincoln as president was a hostile act against the South, which left him no recourse other than secession in order to defend their liberty, honor, and safety. At one time, Clay was suspected of conspiring to hire John Wilkes Booth to assassinate President Abraham Lincoln, and the U.S. government kept him in prison for nearly a year after the Civil War on the belief that he was involved in the conspiracy. Clay was held prisoner in Fort Monroe in Hampton, Virginia, at the same time as former Confederate President Jefferson Davis. Virginia Clay personally pleaded with President Johnson to release her husband, and he was freed in April 1866. The release of Clay was considered as a possible factor in the impeachment of President Johnson. Clay's widow later wrote, "A belle of the 50s, an account of her life in Washington, D.C. as the wife of a U.S. Senator."
Huntsville, Alabama was a nothing town, pretty much, and then the rocket industry came in and everything changed. And there are a lot of rocket scientists buried here. People worked with Wernher von Braun. And let me show you this. This is interesting. I'm not sure what this is. I don't know if this gentleman is dead. But look, to infinity and beyond. Jimmy Russell Powers. This is also a NASA person. Barney Ronald Collar, 1938 to 2020. He accomplished the unaccomplished. This is the day the Lord has made. We will rejoice and be glad in it. And look, somebody's left the instrument down here. Worked for NASA. So this is the grave of Conrad Danenberg, 1912 to 2009.
He was a key player of America's efforts to put the first man on the moon. Danenberg was drafted into Hitler's German army in 1939 as a horse artilleryman, but was discharged in 1940 to work as a rocket propulsion specialist. He helped develop the propulsion for the V-2 rocket, which achieved escape velocity and reached outer space. Hitler, however, used around 3,000 V-2 missiles in 1944 as a vengeance weapon to attack Allied cities like Paris and London in retaliation for the Allied bombings of German cities. Weighing 23 tons and traveling at 3,000 miles per hour, the V-2 delivered death from the skies without warning. It flew too high and too fast to be tracked by radar or attacked by anti-aircraft guns or aircraft. The V-2s killed nearly 3,000 Brits and injured around 6,500. When the 117 scientists like Danenberg realized that the German cause was lost, they surrendered to American troops rather than be captured by the Soviets. Thus, the talent and technology became American property. Working as part of Operation Paperclip, Danenberg and others like Wernher von Braun initially worked at Fort Bliss, Texas, where Danenberg used to seize V-2s in propulsion research. Later, they transferred to the Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville at the start of the Korean War. There he helped develop the Redstone missile and later worked on the Jupiter rocket project at the Army Ballistic Missile Agency in Detroit, Michigan. In 1960, Danenberg moved to the NASA Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, where he helped develop the propulsion system for the Saturn V rocket, which carried Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin to the moon in 1969. When he died, he was 96 years of age.
So Danenberg's up here, and coming over here, there's another rocket scientist right here.
Rocket scientist Hinrich Liebl lived from 1925 to 2020. His interest in aerodynamics began in his youth when he and his friends constructed a functioning hang glider. At the age of 17, Liebl was drafted into the German army, and he was captured in Belgium and sent to England. While he was held as prisoner of war, he earned his equivalency of a high school diploma. In 1958, Liebl was recruited by Wernher von Braun to work in NASA in Huntsville. He worked on projects ranging from Saturn rockets to the space shuttle missions, primarily working with engines. His most notable work was engineering the parachute recovery for the space shuttle's solid rocket booster.
This is one of the most unique markers here in the cemetery. It definitely gives you the impression of a rocket, tip of a rocket. Ellipsoid represent orbits.
Ted Pudin was a founding member of the Von Braun Astronomical Society. He worked as a physicist at the Army Ballistic Missile Agency from December 1951 to July 1960, during which time he helped to work on the Redstone rocket. He was an aerospace technologist at NASA's Marshall Space Center until January 1979. During his career at NASA, Pudin was involved with projects and programs like Orbiting Research Lab and the Mariner program.
Okay, for you sports fans, I am visiting the grave of Donald Mincher. He lived from 1938 to 2012, and for 13 seasons, from 1960 to 1972, he played at the first base position with the Washington Senators and the Minnesota Twins, the California Angels, Seattle Pilots, the Oakland A's, and the Texas Rangers. And he actually went to the World Championship with the Oakland A's in 1972 and recorded one hit during the World Series, the final hit of his career. This man here had the distinction of playing with Joe Rudy, who was one of the most famous baseball players from my part of Central California. Joe Rudy, of course, catching that famous knockout into the left field. And during his years in the majors, Mincher topped 20 home runs 5 times and had the distinction of playing with both the Washington Senators franchises. In 1,400 regular season games, he amassed 1,003 hits, 2.49 lifetime batting average. After he retired from professional baseball, he owned a sporting goods shop here in Huntsville. This guy isn't necessarily famous, but I thought his marker was really cool. He lived from 1936 to 2019. Garland Eugene Sparks. He obviously loved cars, but look at that. This is the grave of Jessup Whitehead. He was a famous chef from the Hotel Monteseo, an author of cookbooks, born in London, England, 1833. He died 1889. I spent probably over a half hour looking for the grave of Harry Towns, the actor. I eventually had to give up because the GPS coordinates listed on Find a Grave were completely wrong. Harry Towns was an actor who appeared in a number of TV shows, including the Mill episode of Bonanza, which aired in 1960. In that episode, Towns plays Tom Edwards, who was a neighbor of the Cartwrights, who has lived as a paraplegic ever since an accident involving Ben Cartwright and a gun.
Ben, we'll be friends again? Let me tell you, Ben, in my heart, when I'm not in pain, I mean, in my heart, I never blame you. It was my gun, my fault.
He made 3 appearances on Bonanza and 7 on Gunsmoke, and he also appeared in The Fugitive. He also appeared in Screaming Mimi, a 1958 movie starring Anita Ekberg. So I think that's going to wrap up this episode of History Hunters. I hope you enjoyed seeing some of the graves here, the historic graves in Huntsville, Alabama. It's not every day that we come to Alabama, but I hope you enjoyed what we showed you. A varied aspect of history of the South and of Huntsville and the United States. There were a couple of graves I could not find, and I just can't spend all day looking for them. But hey, I appreciate you coming along with us. Hope you enjoyed it. Please give us a thumbs up, and if you could, leave us a comment. Thank you so much.